New videos every day. Life, wisdom.
So, Dr. Balanzi, there's a lot of controversy over the use of chemicals on our foods, pesticides, for instance. And of course, one side seeing that there's this benefit of a higher production yield, they're able to produce more food. And on this other side, people who are really afraid of the dangers that these chemicals cause. What is your perspective as a doctor, as somebody who has dealt with many people and their health issues, helping them overcome their health issues? What side are you on?
It's hard to really pick a side, and the problem is people tend to take things to extremes. Yes, we want to take the benefit of things. DuPont coined the term better living through chemistry years ago and started developing all these different chemicals. And, we have plastics, we have all these things that we use in our day-to-day life, but we're also finding that they have possible ramifications for us, BPAs and such chemicals. So even the packaging of food may be tainting our food and then causing us hormone disturbances and other health issues. So can we stay completely organic and still live in our modern society? I mean, these are questions that we have to ask and answer. And the thing is, the pendulum keeps swinging. And currently, there are a lot of people actually attacking the whole organic movement, trying to say that there's more benefit to using these things than there is to not using them. Because yes, if we use pesticides, we don't have as much crop destruction. We can grow more things. We can actually increase yields. And so we'll be able to feed more people. Or a real controversial thing right now is DDT. Do we use something that will kill the insects, especially the mosquitoes and the other vectors? Or do we stay away from that and use something that's going to be not damaging to human beings? And there's evidence on both sides. I mean, which way do we go? Years ago, there was a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and she made and there was research behind that, and she made a real strong case for the fact that we may be slowly killing ourselves for the use of these things. But again, then there are other people saying that there are benefits to the use of the chemicals. In my practice and in research, there are quite a few cases where people have suffered very bad health consequences from being exposed to chemicals. So we have to keep that in perspective. And especially many of the pesticides that are used, there is a tie to brain damage. We know there's a direct tie to Parkinson's. We know that other things occur when people get exposed. In India, there were just several children that were killed because of pesticide-laden foods. So if it's going to be something that can kill an insect, I think it can have some possible damage to our systems, and we have to keep that in perspective. But again, which side are you going to argue on? It's hard to say. But I have said so many people who through exposure to something have then had health problems for the rest of their life, and perhaps even fatal.
Right. And I can certainly understand this argument of a higher production yield means more food, means we can feed more people. But if the higher production yield you're yielding is food which is potentially dangerous, which has shown to have toxic effects on people, and whose long-term effects really we don't even know yet because they just haven't been around long enough, then I really do think that it is an important question to ask. Is it worth a higher yield if the higher yield you're yielding is toxic food? And certainly there's our personal lives and what we personally choose to do, what we personally choose to eat, but then also recognizing that the use of these chemicals, whether we choose to eat organic or not, the presence of these chemicals going into the soil, going into our water, as you've pointed out before, with farms, if you've got an organic farm here and a non-organic farm there, there's really, there's no way to, set up a wall in between the two farms to keep them separated. And the same thing has been said about GMO seeds. And of course, that's another issue that we're seeing get lots of tension.
Right. We just don't know enough yet.
Because, people are saying, hey, your GMO seeds over on this lot are going to, potentially come over via wind, as seeds do.
It's already happened, yeah.
And actually start to potentially harm these other people who are trying to go the natural route. So my question is, what is the implication of these practices continuing on a global scale in terms of looking at our soil and looking at these different chemicals like DDT just entering the environment and becoming more prevalent in the environment?
Well, the biggest problem is that even in toxicology, there's something ignored called the body burden. Basically, there is an accumulated effect. So perhaps I can tolerate a little bit of something. Mm-hmm. Perhaps my body will deal with it. It won't cause as much of a problem. But over time, as I store some of these things in my body and I start accumulating more, I reach a certain burden, a certain threshold where my body can no longer function in a healthy manner. Mm-hmm. And now even toxicologists talk about this body burden effect. What is the total picture, as opposed to, well, this little bit of DDT won't hurt you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't make it that simple. And what is the implication overall on how my body's going to function today, but also later on in the future? Mm-hmm. And that's where we just don't have the answers yet. So yeah, you can spray pesticides all over people and animals and plants and probably not see an immediate effect. But what is the effect by the end of your life or throughout your life? And then what is the effect on your progeny, the people that are going to come after you? How is it affecting what you're going to pass on? Because it's more than just even the genetics that you pass on. It's something called epigenetics, and you may have made alterations that are going to not allow people in the future to even be healthy. So we have to take these into consideration. We know over evolution that whole natural food that's organic, hasn't been tainted, is going to be safe for us because we're here. And we made it.
And we've survived all of these thousands of years eating that organic diet.
So it's a proven track record. What are we doing now with this bulk of chemicals? And there's more chemicals out there than ever before, things never seen in nature before. So what's the implication? And I think we just need to be a little more cautious and not let the pendulum swing too far in the fact that, well, it's convenient and it's good to use all this stuff.
Another factor that comes into play here is that we have these regulatory agencies whose purpose is to protect the consumer, to kind of look out at these different chemicals and different practices and just make sure that they're safe, make sure that the things that, we as the consumer are receiving are healthy for us. So the FDA comes to mind, for example. But in terms of, I could talk about the FDA's track record, I think it's important that we recognize that there's a lot of money changing hands here. And when you have these companies who are using genetic modification or are using pesticides or are using these different chemicals and things like that, they have a lot of profit riding on their ability to use those things. And then we've actually seen instances where somebody who's on the payroll of one of these companies, like Monsanto, suddenly a few years later is actually working for the FDA. We see these constant conflicts of interests. We can look at the history of some of these different chemicals like Agent Orange and see that, do you think that we can look at something like that and say maybe we should have learned our lesson about the safety of these chemicals and what people should know about how much we can trust the FDA to be there looking out for us and making sure that these things are safe?
Well, it's all conflict of interest. And yes, a lot of people who are regulating these companies also work for the companies. There's a lot of money on the line. When a new drug comes out, it's been said that in excess of $1 million a day is being lost as the company's waiting for approval. Mm-hmm. And there's just not the time and the resources to really test these things out completely. Think of all the drugs that have been released and then had to be pulled back because over time it was realized that they weren't all that safe. Mm-hmm. And they were perhaps put on the market a little bit too quickly and perhaps even used for things that they should have been used for. But that really couldn't have been known even without the conflict of interest. So again, we have to be a little more careful, I think, at what we use and how we use it and what we allow out there. And it's not that everything has to be tested to a point of exhaustion, but But again, we just don't know the answer to some of these questions. And when the body is confronted with something new, when the molecule structure is different, then you get some kind of different response. Your own body does that. Mm-hmm. Your own body tends to take molecules and change their orientation, change them in a way that a different result will be gotten. And we have to keep that in mind, that something that's never been seen in nature before, made on a chemist's bench, may not be 100% safe.
Right. And, you make that point that, well, obviously it would be, maybe impossible to really test all of these chemicals ad nauseum and really test them for every different potential combination that you have. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to realize that many of these different food chemicals and food additives aren't tested at all before they're or are tested so minimally before they are released. I had assumed that, the FDA tests these things for safety. But some of these tests, they're just for a short period of time, like 4 to 6 weeks.
Exactly.
Where if this is a chemical that goes into a really common food, we're exposed to it the rest of our lives. And they just haven't tested it for long-term effects. Or they just, there are so many new chemicals, and as you pointed out, this sense of urgency that they want to get them approved, and then they, maybe things get the seal of approval, so to speak, before we really know that they're safe. And then a couple years later, they say, oh, wait, we got to take the BPAs out, or we found out that this isn't safe after all. How can people protect themselves? How can people maybe feel like they're taking a step to protect themselves from these chemicals and provide a safe, healthy diet for their family?
Well, that's a key right there. If you're eating a healthy diet, your body's going to be able to deal with these things. One of the biggest problems in the drug industry is how can the body handle that drug, and especially in detoxifying. So I administer a drug, I take a pill, and can my body actually dispose of that? And so there are some genetic tests actually coming out specifically to that. There are tests on statin drugs, for example, and many people cannot detoxify the statin or get rid of it, and it builds up and becomes a bigger problem. So now they have found some certain genetic polymorphisms or variations that can be tested for, and know, okay, who's going to be able to tolerate it and who isn't.
Right.
These questions aren't necessarily answered in a study because what's called the N may not be big enough. It may have been a very small study and really not looked at it extensive enough, or there's something else called the number to treat. I mean, how many people do I have to treat with this, and who's going to benefit and who isn't? Mm-hmm. But as far as protecting yourself, if you're eating for the most part a real food diet, and you're getting the nutrients in so that you can detoxify and get these things removed from the body. And if you're physically active, so that same process can occur, then you're going to be much safer. Mm-hmm. Because it's a real problem if you're fairly sedentary and you're not eating the phytonutrients that you would need. Now you're going to accumulate that burden I was talking about. The load's going to go up because I'm not eliminating those things. Think of people that are simply just constipated all the time. So their body's working to perhaps get rid of some of these chemicals that were brought in from the environment, whether they're pesticides or things that were put in the food, and yet they're just storing them away because they're not eliminating them. Mm-hmm. It's very dangerous to hold on to these things and accumulate that load.
Right. And I think you brought up another really great point, which is that every single person's body is going to react differently to these chemicals. Yeah. And while they can test something for safety on this certain group of people, it's in no way assuring that there won't be some people who have a negative reaction to these things. So not only do we have the accumulation factor, the body burden, which is that when we're exposed to these things and we eat these things, they don't just go in one end and out the other. These things can accumulate in our bodies. And
a lot of times if you put a couple different things together that were kind of innocuous on their own, when they get together, they're very dangerous.
Right. So yes, the combined effects of the different chemicals, the fact that every person is going to have a different reaction to different chemicals and different things. And maybe what would be, in closing of our discussion here, we talked about protecting ourselves, eating a good diet, trying to do physical exercise and things like this. Do you think it's important that people, always opt for organic? We get that question a lot on the channel. How important is it to eat organic?
I think it's very important. And again, there's a lot of controversy on that. But unfortunately, many of the studies on organic versus not organic, basically, they had people eat organic food and then non-organic food, and they asked them how they felt. Well, you're not going to see the effect in that short time of that study. Mm-hmm. So I think what you need to do is be a little more aware, a little more educated on what you're actually using. How was this food prepared? Or more so, what is this drug meant to do? What should I expect that's positive? What could I possibly see as a side effect? And has it been tested on a population like me? Mm-hmm. The best example is that many drugs kids are basically experimented on. The study's done on adults, and then doctors decide, well, maybe we should try it on kids, but no study's done. Mm-hmm. And then kids suffer and we have problems. So have a little bit more awareness if you're going to use something that isn't organic, but you can have confidence if you know something's organic that you're probably going to be safer with it. Right. So for that reason, it's probably worthwhile at least making some of your diet organic.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for joining us. Thank you for visiting our channel. I do hope that you will subscribe so you can check out our future videos. Visit us at thetruthtalks.net and be sure to leave a comment letting me know what you thought about the information shared today. Is it worth it to use these chemicals to get more food, or are these chemicals dangerous? I'm Psyche Truth Correspondent Karina Rachel. Thank you so very much for watching.